He trusted everyone, until one message changed everything. The sun dipped low over the Pacific Ocean, casting a golden sheen across a sprawling estate nestled into the cliffs of Malibu. Expensive suits and glittering gowns moved fluidly around the terrace as music swirled in the background. Waiters glided through the crowd with trays of champagne and hors d'oeuvres, weaving past groups of laughing guests and string lights that fluttered in the ocean breeze. At the heart of it all stood Ethan Monroe. He was exactly the kind of man you'd expect to host a party like this, lean, well-groomed, confident without being arrogant. He smiled easily, the kind of smile that said he'd already won life's biggest battles and now just enjoyed the game. His presence radiated calm control, even as the crowd celebrated his 38th birthday like it was a national event. Beside him, always half a step behind or to the side, was Damian Chase, his best friend. If Ethan was a calm before the storm, Damian was the storm's charm. Quick-witted, sharply dressed, and always ready with the right thing to say, he had the kind of magnetism that made strangers comfortable and women lean in just a little closer. They had grown up together, orphaned from the same rundown LA neighborhood, both scraping their way through life, though only Ethan had turned into a legend. Damian had been there every step of the way, the unofficial advisor, the trusted fixer, the guy who could be sent anywhere and return with results. As Ethan raised his glass, the crowd went silent. To friends, he said, scanning the room, the ones who knew us before the world did. Everyone cheered. Damian clinked glasses with Ethan, his grin wide and effortless. But across the room, Naomi Lee wasn't clapping. She watched the two men from behind the bar, eyes narrowed, intuition humming like static electricity before a lightning strike. Naomi had worked for Ethan for 4 years, his executive assistant, his scheduler, sometimes his conscience. She didn't trust easily, and she definitely didn't trust Damian. She'd seen too many inconsistencies in the last year. Strange meetings Damian would schedule for Ethan and then cancel last minute. Financial records that didn't line up. Phone calls that ended abruptly when she walked in. But this was Ethan's day, and Naomi, like always, stayed in the background. Later that night, the guests trickled out, the jazz faded, and Ethan was left on his balcony with a glass of scotch and the ocean crashing below. Damian had already left, claiming he had a late dinner downtown. Ethan didn't think much of it. Damian was always networking, always chasing something. That's when the message came in. It was on a second phone, his secure line. Only 3 people had the number. Naomi, a government contact he barely used, and his lawyer. The screen lit up with a text from an unknown sender. You trust him too much. He's feeding your enemy. No punctuation. No explanation. Just that. Ethan stared at the screen for a full minute, rereading the message again and again. It didn't say Damian's name, but he didn't need it to. He felt it in his gut. That strange, cold twist in the stomach that instinct sends long before logic can. He showed it to Naomi the next morning. She didn't act surprised. That message is just confirmation, she said. Confirmation of what? That you've been trusting the wrong person for too long. He wanted to argue. He wanted to tell her that Damian had saved his life more than once, that he'd been there when Ethan had nothing, that their friendship had survived 1,000 tests. But the words wouldn't come. Instead, he found himself remembering a week ago when Damian had been adamant about Ethan pulling out of a clean water tech investment, an investment that 2 days later had been picked up by a competitor. Look, Ethan, Naomi continued, you're a good man, but being a good man doesn't mean you can't be fooled. It just means you're a bigger target. He didn't reply. He didn't even nod. But something behind his eyes hardened. 2 days later, he made a call. Silas Grant answered on the second ring. You don't know me, Ethan said, but I got your name from someone I trust. Not sure whether that's a compliment or a red flag, Silas replied dryly. I need to find out if someone close to me is working against me. Quietly, completely off the books. Silas didn't ask who. He didn't ask why. He just asked for an address and a photo. It felt wrong. Ethan spent most of his life believing that loyalty should never be questioned. But lately, loyalty felt like a leash around his neck. If the message had come from a stranger, maybe he could have dismissed it. But it hadn't just come. It landed like a puzzle piece, sliding into place next to months of subtle warnings he had ignored. Damien's increasing access to sensitive business information, his insistence on running interference with major investors, his tendency to redirect conversations when Naomi brought up concerns. Now that Ethan looked for it, he saw the pattern. Or maybe, he thought bitterly, he was just finally allowing himself to see it. Silas moved fast. Within 24 hours, he had Damien's phone records, movement for the past 3 weeks, and a discreet tale assigned. Ethan didn't ask for details. He just waited, each hour stretching like rubber bands across his nerves. Meanwhile, Damien was his usual self. They played racquetball, had drinks, went over pitch decks. If Damien noticed Ethan's change in demeanor, he didn't show it. He talked about the upcoming charity gala like it was the most important thing in the world. He even told Ethan, "It's gonna be your legacy, man. The stuff that makes you immortal." And somehow, that made Ethan feel worse. He sat with Naomi one night at the office, staring out the window as the city glowed beneath them. "What if we're wrong?" he asked. "We might be," she said. "But what if we're not?" Silence stretched between them. He thought about how Damien had stood by him during the most brutal year of his life, the lawsuit, the media storm, the near bankruptcy. Damien had slept in the guest house for weeks back then, helping coordinate strategy, feeding Ethan's dog, making sure he ate. That kind of devotion wasn't fake. It couldn't be, could it? Naomi didn't push. She just sat beside him, arms folded, eyes watching the skyline. She knew this wasn't just about betrayal. This was about identity. About whether Ethan could still believe he'd made it here by trusting his instincts, or whether he'd been played the whole time. The first report came in a week later. Silas didn't smile when he walked into Ethan's study. He dropped a folder on the table. "Start here," he said. Ethan opened it, his hand steady but his throat tightening. Photos, dates, locations. Damien entering a midtown hotel. Seated in a cafe with a man Ethan immediately recognized, Victor Braxley. Victor Braxley, the one rival Ethan had vowed never to deal with again. A man known for gutting startups and stripping tech founders of their companies like carcasses. Braxley had tried to buy Ethan out 3 years ago. When Ethan refused, Braxley went on a smear campaign so vicious it nearly tanked Ethan's reputation. And here Damien was, having coffee with him, smiling. There were more pages. Expense reports Damien had hidden in different departments. Payments received into an offshore account linked to a shell corporation in the Cayman Islands. Notes on confidential information that had somehow ended up in Braxley's proposals over the past year. It wasn't a maybe anymore. It wasn't a hunch. It was betrayal. Ethan sat back in his chair, the folder resting in his lap. The ocean outside roared louder than usual. He felt like someone had punched a hole in his chest and let the wind in. Damien hadn't just betrayed him. He'd done it slowly, carefully, with the patience of someone who knew exactly how deep to plant the knife. Naomi walked in. She looked at the open file, then at Ethan. "You were right to check," she said softly. "I didn't want to be," he replied. He didn't cry. He didn't scream. He just sat there, absorbing the truth. The man he'd trusted the most had been orchestrating his downfall. And somewhere in the city, Damien Chase was probably laughing with someone over drinks, unaware that the truth was no longer a secret. Ethan stood, walked to the window, and stared into the dark horizon. Now that the truth was out, there was only one question left. What would he do with it? The city never slept, and neither did Silas Grant. In a dim office tucked inside an unremarkable building in downtown Los Angeles, Silas worked with mechanical calm, piecing together the evidence like he had 1,000 times before. He'd once been a detective, robbery, homicide, fraud, but he left the badge behind after learning the truth. Corruption didn't only exist in the streets. Sometimes it wore ties and sat in corner offices. That's why he liked jobs like this. Personal betrayal left a trail, even when the betrayer was someone as slick in practice as Damien Chase. The first few days of surveillance were slow. Damien was smart. He didn't repeat routines, didn't use obvious burner phones, and most of his financial activity was layered through dummy companies that required hours of deep forensic work to untangle. But Silas had patience. He watched. He waited. He followed. Meanwhile, Ethan tried to carry on like nothing had changed, but everything had. The space between his heartbeats was filled with suspicion. He stopped laughing as freely. His eyes lingered longer on Damien during meetings, as though trying to see something he hadn't seen before. Damien remained completely at ease. He told Ethan about a possible investor from Dubai and offered to fly out to vet the deal. He asked about the upcoming Aegis project, Ethan's rumored new cybersecurity prototype. He even dropped hints about helping Ethan co-found a new division under Monroe Ventures. Ethan nodded, smiled, played the part. But inside, he was crumbling in slow motion. The first real breakthrough came from Silas on a Thursday morning. He walked into Ethan's office, tossed a tablet on the table, and hit play. A grainy video showed Damien at a rooftop bar, one of the exclusive ones only high-level execs and politicians frequented. He wasn't alone. Sitting across from him, sipping whiskey, was Victor Braxley. They talked like old friends. No caution, no subtlety. Damien leaned in close, said something, and Braxley smiled wide. Silas muted the video and spoke evenly. They've met 4 times in the last 2 months. Always at private venues. Always off the calendar. That's not a coincidence. Ethan stared at the screen, his jaw tight. What are they talking about? Hard to say. The audio's weak, but one phrase came up more than once. Aegis Protocol. Ethan felt the heat rise in his chest. Aegis wasn't public. Only 6 people knew about it. Naomi, 3 engineers, Ethan himself, and Damien. He rubbed his temples. So his leaking designs. Not just designs, Silas said. We cross-checked Braxley's recent pitch decks. They include word-for-word language from your confidential research documents. Naomi walked in mid-conversation. He's not just leaking it, she said. He's helping Braxley beat you to it. They are submitting a federal security tender next month. Same category as Aegis. Ethan sat back, silent. For a long time, the room was filled only by the low hum of the air conditioner and the rustle of pages as Silas laid down more evidence. When did I become blind? Ethan muttered. When did this start? Naomi sat across from him. Maybe it started the moment you stopped questioning the people closest to you. He wanted to disagree, to defend himself, to claim loyalty should mean something, but the facts stared him down like a jury. Silas wasn't finished. There's something else. He pulled out a printout of a flight manifest. Damien flew to Seattle last weekend. On the return leg, his ticket was paid for by a shell company owned by Braxley's investment fund. Ethan's mouth went dry. He said he was visiting his mother's grave. Silas raised an eyebrow. Either she's buried at an investment firm, or he's lying. That night, Ethan didn't go home. He sat in his office, lights dimmed, replaying voice memos, emails, and old photos on his phone. Damien laughing on a fishing trip. Damien cheering for Ethan when he won Tech CEO of the Year. Damien holding up a crying Ethan at his father's funeral, saying, I got you, always. But what was real? That was a cruelty of betrayal. It rewrote the past without asking permission. Ethan didn't want revenge. Not yet. He wanted truth. He wanted to be wrong. But he wasn't. Silas moved into phase 2 of the investigation. He tapped Damien's personal phone, bugged his car, put someone inside one of Braxley's companies. Within days, the last piece of the puzzle fell into place. Damien had set up a ghost LLC in Singapore under a false name but traceable through biometric verification logs. That LLC had been used to purchase server data from third-party contractors Ethan had worked with. It was a backdoor into Ethan's systems, one that had gone unnoticed for almost a year. And Damien had orchestrated it all. I want to confront him, Ethan said one morning, his voice flat. Not yet, Silas replied. We need to be smart. You confront him now. He'll deny everything, clean up the paper trail, and Braxley will cut him loose before we can prove a thing. Ethan stood up and walked to the window. So what do we do? Silas glanced at Naomi, then looked back at Ethan. We bait the trap. They put the plan into motion slowly. Ethan played along with Damien, fed him small leaks of new developments in the Aegis protocol. Naomi created a fake prototype folder with exaggerated flaws in the code, and they watched as that same flawed version showed up in Braxley's pre-pitch documents a week later. That was confirmation. They set up a private retreat in Aspen, Ethan invited Damien, claiming he needed space to think and wanted to talk about the future of the company. Damien agreed without hesitation. What Damien didn't know was that the cabin had been wired top to bottom by Silas. Hidden cameras in the lamps, microphones in the vents. Naomi even sent Damien a fabricated investor email suggesting the government was fast-tracking cybersecurity patents for federal defense contracts. On the second night of the cabin, Damien took the bait. Ethan watched from a separate room, listening through a live feed as Damien stepped out onto the snow-covered porch, dialed a burner phone, and spoke. "Tell Victor the prototype's a bust. Ethan thinks he's got something big, but the framework's unstable. He's planning to pitch it next quarter. We've got time." Ethan's stomach turned. Hearing it in Damien's own voice was worse than the evidence, worse than the photos, worse than anything Silas had shown him. He felt something die in him. Damien didn't just betray him. He mocked him. He spoke like Ethan was a fool, someone to be pitied, someone to be manipulated. The next morning, Ethan walked into the kitchen and poured Damien a cup of coffee. "You sleep all right?" he asked. "Like a baby," Damien said. Ethan studied his face. No guilt, no tension, just ease. The same ease he'd worn for years. "I've been thinking about something," Ethan said quietly. "What if someone close to me was feeding our enemies?" Damien froze for just half a second. A flicker in the eyes, a twitch of the jaw. Then he smiled. "That sounds like paranoia. You all right, man?" Ethan smiled back. "Yeah, I'm fine." They flew back to Los Angeles that evening, and Ethan made up his mind. It wasn't going to be a quiet severance. It wasn't going to be a private discussion. Damien had stolen years from him. He'd used Ethan's loyalty like a weapon. And now, Ethan was going to take that weapon back. He started making calls. Organized a press event, a showcase of the Aegis Protocol. Braxley would be invited. So would half the industry. Investors, press, government representatives, everyone. Naomi and Silas finalized the digital evidence packet. They would sync the live feed, play Damien's confession, and show the data breaches he had engineered. No arrests, no violence, just truth. "I don't want to destroy him," Ethan told Naomi one night. "I just want the world to know who he really is." Naomi looked at him for a long time. Sometimes that's the most painful punishment of all. As the day of the event drew near, Damien stayed close. He praised Ethan. He called him a visionary. He offered to introduce him to foreign diplomats interested in cybersecurity contracts. And Ethan smiled through it all, knowing the stage was already built. And Damien was walking straight into the spotlight. By the time the sun set on the eve of the event, Ethan stood alone in his office, looking out over the city he had conquered. He wasn't angry anymore. He was ready. The day of the event arrived with a kind of electric anticipation that clung to the air before a thunderstorm. The media buzzed for days about Ethan Monroe's game-changing innovation, the so-called Aegis Protocol, a cybersecurity leap that promised to redefine national defense and private protection alike. Rumors swirled. Early government contracts, classified AI components, integration with defense satellites. Ethan had said nothing, only smiled in interviews and promised that all questions would be answered at the unveiling. The truth was, there was no Aegis Protocol. At least, not yet. What was coming wasn't a product reveal, it was a reckoning. The venue was one of the most prestigious in downtown Los Angeles. Glass walls, chrome finishes, spotlights rigged to glide smoothly over a sea of designers, CEOs, defense contractors, and investment firms. Even Braxley was there, dressed in a custom suit, sipping neat scotch and smiling like a man who had already won. Damien arrived shortly after, playing the loyal second-in-command as always. He worked the room with charm, shaking hands, whispering in ears, his laugh echoing across the room like everything was under control. Ethan watched it all from backstage. He adjusted his tie, glanced at Naomi, then at Silas, who stood near the tech crew. "You ready?" Naomi asked, voice steady. "As I'll ever be." The presentation began like any other. A light show, a highlight reel of Monroe Ventures' past innovations. Polished, upbeat, crowd-pleasing. Then came Ethan's introduction, standing ovation, camera flashes, applause. He walked out with the confidence of a man at the top of his empire. But this time, he wasn't carrying a product. He was carrying a truth the whole room wasn't ready for. "Thank you," Ethan began, his voice rich and calm. "Tonight, you expected a prototype, a launch, a breakthrough. But before I give you what you came for, I have a story to tell." The room shifted. Silence crept in. Damien, in the front row, tilted his head slightly. He smiled, a touch unsure. Ethan continued, "Many of you know me as a man who built his success on trust. I've always said I'd rather be burned for trusting someone than live a life built on paranoia. But lately, I've learned something about trust. It's not just a gift, it's a gamble." A murmur began in the back rows. Cameras zoomed in. "For the past year, someone close to me, a person I considered family, has been selling my wake, my vision, and my legacy to one of my greatest rivals." He paused. "And I have proof." On cue, Silas triggered the screens. The auditorium darkened as security footage played. Damien on the rooftop bar with Braxley. Damien on the porch in Aspen, whispering into a burner phone about the Aegis protocol. The room went still. A couple of people gasped. Others turned to look at Damien, whose face had gone pale beneath the stage lights. But Ethan wasn't done. He clicked to the next slide, a map of financial transfers, company links, offshore accounts, all tied directly to Damien. Then the final blow, an audio clip, enhanced and crystal clear. "Tell Victor the prototype's a bust. Ethan thinks he's got something big, but the framework's unstable. He's planning to pitch it next quarter. We've got time." The clip ended. Silence. Ethan stood there for a moment, letting the weight settle. He wasn't angry on stage. He didn't shout or accuse. He simply looked into the audience and said, "This man has been by my side for 15 years. My best friend. My brother in everything but blood. And while I built this company, he slowly carved out pieces of it to hand to someone who once tried to destroy everything I worked for." Security guards appeared discreetly beside Damien, who stood frozen. Braxley quietly slipped out the side exit, already aware his role would be exposed next. A few people followed, sensing that the evening had changed from a showcase to a public execution. Damien finally spoke, his voice trembling just slightly. "Ethan, we can talk about this." Ethan looked at him, no hatred in his expression. "Just sorrow. Talk about what? How you've been lying to me for over a year. How you pretended to support me while lining your own pockets." Damien took a step forward. "You don't understand. I was trying to protect you. Braxley offered things you didn't even know you needed. Partnerships, leverage, access. I was thinking long-term." Ethan cut him off. "You were thinking about yourself. And I get it. Greed is tempting. But you didn't just steal from me. You poisoned the one thing that mattered more than money, loyalty." Security placed a hand on Damien's arm. He looked like he wanted to protest, but knew it was useless. He wasn't being arrested. Ethan wasn't pressing charges. There was no crime the law could chase, only betrayal that the world would never forget. "You won't go to prison," Ethan said, loud enough for the room to hear. "But you'll never work in this industry again. Every investor in this room knows what you are now, and that's all I need." Damien was escorted out. No one stopped to speak to him. No one offered a handshake. His social capital vanished faster than his net worth ever would. After the dust settled, Ethan turned back to the audience. "Now that you've seen the real show," he said, "I want to tell you what I'm actually working on." It wasn't a pitch. It was a promise. Ethan spoke of a real cybersecurity solution, one still in development, designed not for profit, but to secure humanitarian missions around the world. He announced a partnership with international aid organizations to bring encrypted infrastructure to regions plagued by data theft and surveillance oppression. He promised it would be open source, available to communities that couldn't afford protection. "I built enough for myself," he said. "Now it's time to build for others." The room stood again, not with the applause of excitement, but the applause of respect. Afterward, as the crowd filtered out and the lights dimmed, Ethan remained alone on the stage. Naomi joined him, slipping a hand into her coat pocket. "It's done," she said softly. Ethan nodded. "Almost feels empty." "You expected it to feel like victory." I don't know what I expected. He turned and looked at the now empty seat Damien had occupied. I think a part of me hoped he'd come clean. That maybe it was a misunderstanding. Naomi's voice was gentle but firm. You gave him every chance. You gave him your trust. And he spent it like it was his to waste. They walked off the stage together. Outside, the night had turned crisp. A low breeze swept through the city. Ethan looked up at the skyline. All the towers. All the windows. How many people up there were playing the same game Damien played? How many believed the lie that success came at the cost of betrayal? He didn't need to know. He only needed to know who he was now. In the weeks that followed, Damien disappeared from public view. News articles floated around. Speculation, short statement from Braxy denying knowledge of any wrongdoing. But the damage had been done. Neither of them could return to the space they once dominated. Ethan stepped back from the business temporarily. Naomi took over the day-to-day. Silas refused payment for the last phase of the job. You didn't just need proof, he told Ethan. You needed to find yourself again. And maybe that was true, because for the first time in years, Ethan felt no need to prove anything. No need to expand, or dominate, or chase more. He had reclaimed something money couldn't buy: clarity. One morning, he walked the beach alone and thought about the young man he used to be. The one who believed that loyalty was bulletproof. That people who stood beside you in the fire could never turn cold. But the truth, he'd learned, was more complicated. Sometimes the people closest to you are the ones who study you best, not to protect you, but to learn where to cut. And still, he wouldn't stop trusting. He would just start choosing more wisely. He'd build again, slower this time, with fewer hands, but stronger. As he watched the sun rise, orange bleeding into blue over the water, he felt something settle inside him. Not peace, exactly, but resolve. And he knew the question would come one day, from someone younger, someone just starting out. What do you do when the person you trusted most turns out to be the one who betrayed you? He would tell them the truth. You forgive what you can. You learn from what you must. And then you build anyway. Because what they tried to destroy in you, they only feared. And what you rebuild, that's the part they can never take. So now, a question remains, for anyone watching, reading, listening. If someone betrayed you after years of friendship, would you forgive them? Or are some betrayals just too deep?